You've been trying so hard to love yourself, trying to feel worthy, trying to feel confident, trying to feel good enough. You read books, repeat affirmations, force positivity, and fight every negative thought. But the harder you try, the more distant self-love begins to feel. And one day, you quietly wonder, why does loving myself feel like a battle I keep losing? Buddhism gives a gentle but profound answer. Because you're trying to force something that was never meant to be forced. Self-love is not created by effort. It is revealed when the pressure stops. It grows naturally when the mind becomes soft, open, and calm, when you stop pushing and finally learn to allow. Today, you'll learn 7 powerful Buddhist lessons that show you why trying too hard is the very thing blocking the love you're searching for, and how letting go becomes the doorway back to your true self. You can't love yourself while you're fighting yourself. The truth is simple, but it is one of the hardest truths for the human mind to accept. You cannot love yourself while you are secretly at war with yourself. You cannot build inner peace while treating your own mind like an enemy you must defeat. Most people don't even realize they are fighting themselves. The battle is silent, internal, and constant. It shows up in the way you criticize yourself the moment you wake up, in the way you replay your mistakes, in the way you judge your body, your thoughts, your progress, and your life, as if you were a problem that needs fixing before you are allowed to feel worthy. People often approach self-love like a project, thinking, I'll love myself when I lose weight, when my skin gets better, when I fix my face, when I stop overthinking, when I become successful, when I finally get my life together. But that mindset is not self-love at all. It is rejection wearing a mask. It is the belief that you must transform into a different version of yourself before you are allowed to feel kindness or compassion for the person you are today. This creates a painful cycle where you chase love by trying to fix everything that makes you human. Buddhism teaches that this is where suffering begins the moment you argue with the present version of yourself. When you resist what you feel, who you are, or where you stand in life, you create internal friction. You begin to treat your emotions like enemies, your thoughts like threats, and your imperfections like insults. But fighting your flaws does not make them disappear. It only deepens the wound and makes you believe something is fundamentally wrong with you. When you constantly monitor your behavior, your emotions, your appearance, your productivity, and your progress, you put your nervous system in a state of tension, and tension suffocates self-love. Your mind cannot relax enough to feel worthy when it believes it is constantly being watched and judged. You cannot feel at home within yourself when you keep telling yourself that the real you is not good enough. True self-love grows only in the soil of acceptance, not the passive kind of acceptance where you pretend everything is perfect, but the compassionate acceptance that says, I see my flaws, I see my fears, I see my pain, and I will still stand with myself. Love grows when you stop trying to become someone else and finally become gentle with the person you already are. It grows when you release the pressure to be perfect and instead allow yourself to be human. The moment you stop seeing yourself as a problem to solve, everything begins to soften inside you. You stop fighting your own thoughts. You stop punishing yourself for not being where you think you should be. You stop believing that worthiness is something you must earn. Slowly, you begin to treat yourself the way you would treat a friend, with patience, with understanding, and with compassion. That is when real self-love begins. Not later, not one day, but now, in this moment, as you are, too. You mistake self-love for self-perfection. One of the biggest reasons people struggle to love themselves is because they confuse self-love with self-perfection. They believe that loving themselves means becoming a flawless version of who they are, a version with no weaknesses, no insecurities, no fears, no mistakes, and no imperfections. But perfection is not only impossible, it is a moving target. The more you chase it, the further it runs away from you. It keeps you trapped in a constant state of not enough, always waiting for the day you finally become worthy of the love you deny yourself right now. From childhood, many of us absorb the idea that love must be earned. We learn to chase approval, praise, rewards, and attention. So when we grow up, we apply the same logic to ourselves. We tell ourselves, "I'll love myself when I finally look better," or "I'll be kind to myself when I stop making mistakes," or "I'll accept myself when I'm more successful." Each of these conditions reinforces the painful belief that the current version of you is unworthy. This is why self-love feels distant, because you've tied it to a future version of yourself that may never come. Buddhism teaches that perfection is an illusion created by the mind to avoid discomfort. It convinces you that once everything is perfect, then peace will come, but the mind never stops finding flaws. Even when you improve, it shows you something else that needs fixing. Even when you grow, it whispers that others are still ahead of you. Even when you succeed, it makes you fear losing what you gained. When you chase perfection, you are not actually healing. You are avoiding the emotions, insecurities, and truths you don't want to face. This constant pursuit of a better you keeps you disconnected from the real you. It keeps you afraid of slowing down, because slowing down means confronting your raw self without filters. It keeps you harsh toward yourself, because you believe the harshness is what motivates growth. But harshness does not create transformation. It creates anxiety, shame, and exhaustion. And none of those emotions allow love to grow. When you treat self-love as something you can only feel after you become perfect, you turn it into a reward instead of a foundation. You forget that love is what helps you grow, not what you receive after you grow. Imagine telling a child, "I'll only love you after you stop making mistakes." The child would collapse under the weight of that pressure. And yet, this is what many adults say to themselves every single day. The Buddhist approach is different. It teaches that real self-love begins when you stop trying to become perfect and instead begin to see yourself with gentle honesty. It teaches that true growth comes from compassion, not from self-punishment. It teaches that flaws are not proof of failure, but proof of being human. When you stop chasing the fantasy of a perfect version of you, you finally make space to understand the real version of you. You stop running. You stop hiding. You stop fearing your own reflection. And in that quiet space, the space where judgment finally dissolves you, begin to realize something profound. You were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to be real. And real people are deserving of love long before they ever become perfect. 3. The more you chase approval, the further you drift from yourself. One of the quietest but most destructive barriers to self-love is the constant need for approval. Many people don't realize it, but the love they think they are searching for is not actually self-love. It is external validation dressed as self-worth. They don't want to feel good with themselves. They want to feel good because someone else approves of them. They want others to confirm that they are lovable so they can finally give themselves permission to believe it. But Buddhism teaches that anything that depends on the outside world is fragile, temporary, and destined to bring suffering. When your self-worth comes from how others see you, you create a life that is built on shaky ground. A single comment can shake your confidence. A single rejection can crush your identity. A single moment of being ignored can make you question your entire existence. You become addicted to praise, terrified of criticism, and constantly scanning the world for signs that you matter. This creates a painful emotional dependency where your inner peace becomes controlled by people who might not even know your true heart. This need for approval shows up in many subtle ways. You might change your appearance to fit what others find attractive. You might soften your personality to avoid judgment. You might hide your opinions because you fear disagreement. You might stay silent about your boundaries to avoid conflict. You might pretend to be happy when you are actually breaking inside. Every time you shapeshift for the sake of being accepted, you send a message to yourself: who I really am is not enough. The tragedy is that the more you try to gain the world's approval, the more disconnected you become from your own soul. You start losing your authenticity piece by piece, until one day you realize you don't even recognize yourself anymore. You begin to feel empty, not because you are broken, but because you abandoned your real self while trying to become someone the world would applaud. Buddhism teaches that craving approval is a form of suffering because it attaches your identity to something that is unpredictable and constantly changing. People's opinions shift based on their emotions, their habits, their insecurities, and their own life experiences. What someone praises you for today, they may criticize tomorrow. What they love about you now may annoy them later. Building your sense of worth on such unstable foundations guarantees disappointment. The truth is that you cannot love yourself if you are not being yourself. Self-love requires honesty, the courage to show up as who you are without shrinking or pretending. But when you chase approval, you hide the very parts of you that need love the most. You protect your mask, but abandon your soul. And a mask can never feel loved. Only the real you can. The moment you stop seeking approval, something powerful happens. You begin to feel lighter. You breathe more freely. You speak your truth without fear. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop needing to be understood by everyone. You stop being triggered by every opinion. Instead of molding yourself to make others comfortable, you start building a life where you feel comfortable. This is where self-respect grows, in the moments when you choose your truth over someone else's expectations. And slowly, your heart learns a lesson it has waited years to understand. You never needed people to approve of you. You only needed to stop abandoning yourself. Approval from others may feel good for a moment, but approval from your own soul lasts a lifetime. 4. Self-love begins when comparison ends. Comparison is one of the most silent destroyers of inner peace, and yet it is one of the most common habits of the human mind. People compare without even realizing it. They compare the shape of their face, the tone of their skin, the size of their body, the progress of their life, the amount of their success, the strength of their relationships, the money in their account, the confidence of others, the happiness of others, and the direction of others. And every comparison plants a small seed of doubt inside the heart, a doubt that quietly says, you are behind, you are less, you are not enough. That tiny seed grows into self-hate without you even noticing. Buddhism teaches that comparison is a form of suffering created by the ego. The ego survives by measuring itself against others. It constantly looks outward to determine if it is winning or losing, ahead or behind, superior or inferior. The ego convinces you that your value depends on how closely you match someone else's highlight reel. This creates an endless loop of self-judgment where no achievement ever feels enough, because the mind always finds someone who appears to be doing better. The painful truth is this: comparison disconnects you from your own path. Instead of walking your journey with presence and clarity, you become obsessed with looking at other people's lanes. You study their timing, their progress, their results, and their achievements, forgetting that their story is not yours and never was meant to be. Comparison doesn't just make you feel inferior, it distracts you from the life you were meant to live. Every time you compare yourself to someone else, you abandon yourself. You stop seeing your strengths, your growth, your uniqueness, and your potential. You overlook how far you've come because you are so focused on how far someone else seems to be. You lose gratitude for your blessings because someone else appears to have more. You lose joy in your journey because someone else's chapter looks more exciting. You lose peace because someone else's life looks easier. And worst of all, you lose the ability to love yourself because you keep measuring yourself with someone else's ruler. What people fail to understand is that comparison is always an illusion. You do not see people's struggles, insecurities, traumas, or sleepless nights. You see their polished surface, their filtered highlights, their loud achievements, their smiling photos, and their curated stories. You see the results, not the pain. You see the destination, not the journey. Comparing your reality to someone else's presentation is a guarantee for self-doubt, because you are judging yourself against an image that isn't even real. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises when the mind clings to illusions, and comparison is one of the most powerful illusions of all. It makes you believe that life is a race. It makes you believe there is a timeline. It makes you believe there is a correct order to success or happiness. But in reality, life unfolds differently for every soul. Some flowers bloom early, others bloom late, but each bloom is beautiful in its own time. Rushing your growth because someone else is growing faster only damages your roots. The moment you begin to release comparison, a deep shift happens inside you. You start seeing your life as your own unique path instead of a competition. You begin to appreciate your pace, even if it is slow. You begin to value your decisions, even if they look different from others. You begin to celebrate your small victories without worrying about who is doing more. And slowly, the pressure inside your chest begins to lift. When comparison ends, presence begins. You stop living through the eyes of others and finally return to your own. You begin to notice your blessings. You begin to feel grateful for what you have instead of resentful for what you don't. You begin to understand that you are not behind. You are simply on a different path. You stop judging yourself for not being someone else and start appreciating yourself for being you. And this is where self-love finally enters, because you can only love yourself when you stop trying to become someone else. The moment you let go of comparison, you create space for compassion, contentment, and genuine peace to grow. You no longer measure your worth. You simply honor it. You no longer compete. You evolve. You no longer chase someone else's life. You finally live your own. 5. You don't need to create self-love. You need to return to it. Most people believe that self-love is something they must build from the ground up, something they must create, chase, force, or earn. They think self-love is a reward waiting at the end of healing, success, transformation, or achievement. But Buddhism teaches something radically different and profoundly freeing. Self-love is not something you create. It is something you return to. You were born with it. It was your natural state long before the world taught you how to doubt yourself. When you were a child, you did not question your worth. You did not criticize your face, your body, your voice, or your personality. You did not look into the mirror searching for flaws. You did not compare your life to others. You did not try to earn love by performing or pretending. You simply existed, and that existence felt enough. You cried without shame, laughed without fear, played without judgment, and expressed your truth without hesitation. That was self-love in its purest form, untouched, untrained, and unbroken. So what happened? Life happened, people happened, opinions happened. You were told to behave a certain way, look a certain way, perform a certain way, and live a certain way. You were taught that you must be good, smart, successful, beautiful, or strong to be worthy. You internalized criticism, comparison, rejection, and disappointment. Slowly, layer by layer, the natural love you once felt for yourself became buried under fear, insecurity, shame, and self-doubt. And this is where people misunderstand healing. They think healing means building a new version of themselves, but true healing means uncovering the original self hidden beneath the layers of conditioning. You do not need to create love, because it was never lost, only forgotten. You do not need to become worthy because you always were. You simply got disconnected from the truth of your own nature. Trying to force self-love is painful because it comes from a place of lack. You repeat affirmations not because you believe them, but because you are desperate to believe them. You practice positivity not because you feel strong, but because you feel broken. You chase motivation not because you enjoy growth, but because you fear being left behind. But all of this comes from the mistaken belief that self-love is something outside of you, something you must reach for rather than something already inside of you waiting to be rediscovered. Buddhism teaches that when you stop trying so hard, when you stop forcing yourself to feel a certain way, something magical happens. The mind becomes quiet enough to hear the truth again. When the noise of self-judgment fades, the softness of self-love returns on its own. When you stop fighting your emotions and begin listening to them, you realize they were never your enemies. They were signals guiding you back to your heart. When you stop running from your flaws and instead sit with them gently, you notice that love expands, not because you achieved perfection, but because you embraced imperfection without fear. Self-love returns when you stop abandoning yourself in moments of pain. It returns when you let yourself rest instead of forcing productivity. It returns when you forgive your past instead of punishing yourself for it. It returns when you give yourself compassion in the moments you feel most undeserving. It returns when you stop trying to be who you should be and begin allowing yourself to be who you are. There is a deep peace that comes from realizing that you are not broken, you are simply disconnected. The new you keep chasing isn't new at all. It's the real you beneath years of judgment and conditioning. The truth is, self-love doesn't need to be built, it needs to be remembered. And the moment you stop forcing love to happen, the moment you stop demanding perfection before giving yourself kindness, you finally make space for the self-love that was always inside you to rise again. When you return to yourself, you return to peace. You return to clarity, you return to softness, you return to the truth you knew as a child. I am enough because I exist. 7. Self-love grows only in stillness, not struggle. People today try to love themselves with the same intensity they use to chase success. They push, force, analyze, and overthink every emotion. They treat self-love like a project that needs to be controlled, or a skill that must be mastered through effort. But Buddhism teaches that the harder you try to force stillness, the more restless your mind becomes. The harder you try to build self-love, the further it slips from your hands. Because love, especially self-love, does not grow in struggle. It grows in stillness. Stillness is not the absence of thought. It is the absence of resistance. It is the state where you stop fighting your feelings, stop denying your emotions, stop running from your insecurities, and stop trying to control everything happening inside you. Stillness is the moment when you allow your inner world to simply exist without demanding that it look a certain way. And it is in that gentle acceptance that self-love finds the space to breathe again. Most people don't realize how much noise they carry inside. The noise of comparison, the noise of old pain, the noise of unmet expectations, the noise of fear, the noise of memories they never processed, the noise of voices that taught them they weren't enough. This noise becomes so constant that silence feels uncomfortable. When people finally sit with themselves, they don't feel peace, they feel exposed. They feel their buried emotions rising, and instead of listening, they get scared and run back to distractions. But real healing happens when you stop running from the noise and start observing it. When you sit quietly with your breath and let the storm inside you settle at its own pace, not because you're trying to force calmness, but because you're creating a safe space for it to arise naturally. When the mind slows down, clarity appears. When clarity appears, truth follows. And when truth follows, self-love returns, because truth always reveals that you were never unworthy, you were simply overwhelmed. Stillness allows you to hear what constant movement hides. It reveals the needs you've been ignoring, the fears you've been suppressing, and the wounds you've been carrying alone. In stillness, you begin to understand your inner child, the part of you that was scared, rejected, criticized, or misunderstood. You begin to realize that this child never needed perfection. It needed patience. It needed presence. It needed someone who would not rush its emotions or shame its imperfections. Stillness is how you finally become that person. Self-love grows in the moments when you stop demanding that your heart hurry up and heal. It grows when you stop measuring your progress. It grows when you stop expecting yourself to be strong all the time. It grows when you let yourself cry without guilt, when you let yourself rest without calling yourself lazy, when you let yourself feel lost without forcing instant clarity. These moments of gentle stillness create the inner environment where self-love can finally rise without fear of being judged or dismissed. In Buddhism, stillness is not something you achieve. It is something you fall into when you stop trying to control reality. It is the natural quiet that appears when you let go of the mind's need to fix everything, when you sit in silence, breathe slowly, and allow your thoughts to come and go without attaching to them. You begin to see your true self, the self beneath the noise, the fear, the expectations, and the pressure. That self is not flawed. That self is not unworthy. That self is not broken. That self is simply human and deeply deserving of compassion. Stillness teaches you that you do not need to fight to love yourself. You need to stop fighting. You need to soften. You need to listen. You need to breathe. You need to allow. Self-love cannot grow in a mind that is constantly punishing itself. It grows in a mind that finally gives itself permission to rest. It grows in the long exhale after years of holding everything in. It grows quietly, slowly, and naturally when you stop forcing your heart to become something it is not ready to be. When you let go of struggle, you create space for softness. And in that softness, you discover that self-love isn't something you achieve, it's something you uncover. It was always there, waiting for the day you stopped running long enough to feel it. 8. You will finally love yourself when you stop making your healing a performance. One of the biggest obstacles to self-love is the pressure you put on yourself to heal correctly, to grow perfectly, and to change in the way you think you're supposed to, without realizing it. Many people turn healing into a performance. They make it something they have to prove, measure, or show results for. They tell themselves they must always be positive, always be improving, always be mindful, always be spiritually calm, always be strong, and always be progressing. And beneath that pressure lies a hidden belief. If I don't heal fast enough, beautifully enough, or successfully enough, then there's something wrong with me. This mindset quietly destroys self-love from the inside. Because when healing becomes a performance, your worth becomes conditional again. You judge yourself for every setback. You punish yourself for every bad day. You shame yourself for every emotion that doesn't fit the image of the healed person you are trying to become. You begin to think that your pain is evidence of failure. You begin to see your struggles as proof that you are still not good enough. You begin to treat your healing journey like a competition, something to win, instead of a gentle unfolding of your inner world. And nothing kills self-love faster than turning your growth into another way to judge yourself. Buddhism teaches that healing has no timeline, no scoreboard, no finish line, and no ceremony that announces, "You are healed now." Healing is not a straight line, it is a spiral. You return to old wounds, not because you failed, but because you are ready to understand them at a deeper level. You revisit old emotions not because you are going backward, but because your heart is now strong enough to process what your past self could not. But when you treat healing like a performance, you miss this truth entirely. You think, "Why am I feeling this again?" instead of, "What is this emotion trying to teach me now?" You think, "I thought I fixed this," instead of, "This is another layer of my becoming." You think, "I shouldn't feel weak," instead of, "My vulnerability is guiding me to a deeper truth." When healing becomes about image instead of authenticity, you begin to hide your pain even from yourself. You tell others you are okay when you feel empty inside. You pretend to be strong because you think strength earns respect. You talk about peace while your heart is carrying storms. You force yourself to be mindful, positive, or self-aware instead of being honest. And every time you pretend, you drift further from yourself. You create a gap between who you are and who you believe you must be. That gap is where self-love suffocates. Self-love cannot grow in a mind that constantly demands perfection, even perfection in healing. Self-love grows only when you allow yourself to be entirely human. That means allowing tiredness without shame, sadness without judgment, confusion without panic, and vulnerability without fear. It means accepting the truth that healing is messy, non-linear, unpredictable, and deeply personal. It means understanding that some wounds heal slowly, not because you're weak, but because they shaped you in ways that require time, patience, and tenderness. It means realizing that your journey cannot be compared to anyone else's, because nobody has lived your life, felt your heartbreaks, or carried your soul's lessons. Healing is not something you perform, it is something you live. People often ask, why can't I love myself yet? But the real question is, why are you rushing the process of loving yourself? You spent years absorbing criticism, shame, trauma, and rejection. You spent years believing you were not enough. You spent years disconnecting from your inner world just to survive. Yet you expect self-love to appear immediately, effortlessly, and flawlessly. But love, especially love for yourself, needs safety. It needs space. It needs patience. It needs time. You cannot rush the heart into trusting what it has been taught to fear. You cannot force softness into a mind that has learned to defend itself. You cannot pressure love into a soul that still remembers hurt. Self-love grows slowly because your heart needs to know it is finally safe. Healing becomes easier the moment you stop demanding perfection from yourself. The moment you allow your emotions to come without fear. The moment you stop telling yourself you should be over this by now. The moment you stop measuring your progress by how happy you look. The moment you let yourself break without labeling yourself as broken. This is where real transformation begins, not in striving, but in surrender, not in control, but in acceptance, not in performance, but in presence. When you stop performing your healing, you begin living it. You become honest with yourself without shame. You allow your pain to speak without silencing it. You give your heart permission to rest without feeling guilty. You let your emotions rise and fall like waves without controlling them. And as you create this inner safety, something profound happens. You stop treating yourself like a project and start treating yourself like a person. You stop forcing improvement and start allowing growth. You stop demanding strength and start giving yourself compassion. This is where self-love breathes. This is where it softens your inner world. This is where it rebuilds your relationship with yourself. Not in the moments you look perfect or healed, but in the moments you allow yourself to be real. When you stop performing, your heart finally feels seen. When you stop rushing, your soul finally feels heard. When you stop pretending, your inner child finally feels held. And when you stop forcing self-love, you finally understand the truth. Self-love was never something you had to create. It was something that naturally rises when you stop trying to become someone else and finally give yourself permission to simply be. Self-love grows in authenticity, not performance. It grows in honesty, not image. It grows in surrender, not struggle. It grows in stillness, not perfection. And when you stop performing your healing, you open the door to the deepest, purest form of self-love, the love that comes from finally meeting yourself, without masks, without pressure, without conditions. The love that says, I am worthy as I am, even in the middle of becoming. 9. You will only love yourself when you stop trying to control every thought and emotion. One of the greatest reasons self-love feels impossible for so many people is because they try to control their inner world with the same force they use to control their outer world. They believe that loving themselves requires cleaning up their mind, eliminating negative thoughts, removing insecurities, staying positive at all times, and maintaining a constant emotional balance. They think that if they could just fix their thinking, their self-love would finally appear. But Buddhism teaches that this constant internal micromanagement is one of the biggest enemies of inner peace. You cannot love yourself while policing every thought, attacking every emotion, and questioning every feeling. Love cannot grow in a mind that is over-managed, over-monitored, and over-controlled. Human beings were not designed to be perfectly balanced machines. You were born with a full range of emotions: joy, fear, anger, sadness, excitement, insecurity, peace, and longing. Each emotion has a purpose, a message, a rhythm. But people today reject half of their emotional experience. They accept happiness but suppress sadness. They welcome confidence but avoid self-doubt. They embrace motivation but reject exhaustion. And without realizing it, they divide themselves into good parts that deserve love and bad parts that deserve judgment. But the true self-love Buddhism teaches includes everything, not only the bright parts, but also the shadows. The moment you reject an emotion, you reject a part of yourself. Many people are so afraid of their own thoughts that they treat their mind like a dangerous place. They panic when a negative thought appears, as if they must fight it immediately or it will destroy them. They monitor their inner dialogue constantly, watching every word that appears, punishing themselves for every intrusive thought, and panicking at the slightest sign of insecurity or fear. This internal surveillance creates anxiety, tension, and self-disgust. And the more you fear your thoughts, the more power they gain. When you try to control your mind too tightly, the mind rebels. It becomes louder, more chaotic, more reactive. And then you blame yourself for not being spiritually stable, emotionally strong, or mentally disciplined. But Buddhism teaches a different wisdom. The mind becomes peaceful not through control, but through understanding. Not through force, but through awareness. Thoughts are not commands. They are clouds passing through the sky of your consciousness. Emotions are not threats. They are waves passing through your inner ocean. When you stop trying to suppress, manipulate, or eliminate them, something beautiful happens. They begin to settle on their own. When you treat your thoughts and emotions with openness instead of fear, they lose their intensity. Stillness emerges naturally when the inner world is not being fought. Self-love becomes impossible when you believe your thoughts define you. You start to think, I had a negative thought, I'm failing. Or, I felt jealous, I'm a bad person. Or, I got insecure, I'm weak. Or, I felt angry, I'm not healed. But emotions do not make you unworthy. Thoughts do not make you unlovable. The mind is a landscape of endless experiences, and you cannot expect yourself to remain in one season forever. A healed person is not someone who never feels negative emotions. It is someone who no longer fears or rejects them. A loving relationship with yourself does not come from controlling your mind. It comes from befriending it. People often wonder why their self-love disappears the moment they feel anxious, sad, or insecure. It's because they attach morality to emotions. They think feeling bad means being bad. They think emotional turbulence means personal failure. They believe self-love requires emotional perfection. But love, real love, must include your worst days, your darkest thoughts, your lowest moments, and your deepest insecurities. If you can only love yourself when you feel good, then your love is conditional, and conditional love can never create peace. You must learn to see your emotions with gentleness. When fear rises, don't fight it, ask what it is trying to protect. When sadness appears, don't shame it, accept it as a signal that something inside you needs attention. When anger rises, don't suppress it. Understand the boundary that was crossed. When insecurity appears, don't hate yourself. Recognize the childhood wound that is asking to be healed. Emotions are not interruptions to your healing. They are healing. They are the inner child knocking on your heart, asking to be seen instead of silenced. The more you try to control your emotions, the more disconnected you become from yourself. You lose touch with your intuition, your authenticity, and your natural inner rhythm. You begin to live from your head instead of your heart. You analyze instead of feeling. You manage instead of listening. You force instead of allowing. And this tension becomes the biggest barrier to self-love, because love cannot survive in a heart that is always being controlled. Love grows in freedom, not pressure. The Buddhist approach invites you to observe your mind instead of controlling it, to sit with your emotions instead of fixing them, to breathe through discomfort instead of resisting it. When you allow your thoughts to come and go without labeling them as good or bad, you begin to realize that none of them define who you are. You are the awareness behind the thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. You are the sky, not the clouds. You are the ocean, not the waves. You are the awareness that experiences emotions, not the emotions themselves. As you create this inner separation, something profound begins to happen. Your emotions lose their power to scare you. You stop fearing sadness because you realize sadness is temporary. You stop fearing anger because you realize anger carries a message. You stop fearing insecurity because you realize it is a wound, not a flaw. You stop fearing your inner world and begin to trust it. And when you trust yourself, you create the foundation for real self-love. Self-love grows when you stop punishing yourself for what you feel. It grows when you allow your inner world to be real instead of perfect. It grows when you stop controlling and start listening. It grows when you stop trying to force happiness and start honoring your emotional truth. It grows when you treat every feeling with compassion instead of judgment. And slowly, the love you've been searching for begins to bloom, not because you mastered your mind, but because you stopped fighting it. You will finally love yourself the day you stop trying to win a war inside your own head. When you allow your inner world to be messy, imperfect, human, and alive, you create the safe space your heart has been waiting for. Love enters the moment control ends. And in that surrender, you discover that the real you, the one you've been repressing, judging, criticizing, and hiding, was always worthy of love. It simply needed to be accepted, not controlled. 10. You will only love yourself when you stop treating your worth like something you must earn. One of the deepest reasons people struggle to love themselves is because they were taught directly or indirectly that worthiness is something you earn. From childhood, many of us learned that love comes with conditions. You are loved when you behave well. You are praised when you succeed. You are accepted when you fit the expectations. You are celebrated when you achieve. As a result, the mind grows up believing that worth is transactional. I am valuable only when I meet certain standards. This belief buries self-love beneath layers of pressure and fear. Without even realizing it, people begin to measure their value based on performance, productivity, appearance, achievements, relationships, or how much others approve of them. Their self-worth becomes fragile, constantly rising and falling depending on how successful they feel in that moment. One mistake can destroy their confidence. One rejection can break their identity. One bad day can make them question their entire existence. This is what happens when worth is tied to achievement. It becomes unstable, unpredictable, and easily shattered. Buddhism teaches that true worth has nothing to do with how much you achieve, how attractive you look, how productive you are, or how perfectly you follow your path. Worth is inherent. It exists simply because you exist. There is a dignity inside every being that cannot be increased by success or decreased by failure. It is a spiritual truth that your value is not earned, It is your birthright. But because life teaches the opposite, most people reject themselves not because they are unlovable, but because they are conditioned to believe they must constantly earn the right to love themselves. This belief appears in subtle ways. You might think, "I'll love myself when I fix my habits," or "I'll feel worthy when I get into the right relationship," or "I deserve love only when I'm successful." You might shame yourself for resting, as if your value disappears the moment you stop working. You might criticize yourself for not being productive enough, strong enough, confident enough, or disciplined enough. You might constantly feel guilty, as though you are somehow failing at life if you are not at your best every single day. This internal pressure becomes a heavy burden, silently crushing your ability to feel compassion for yourself. When worth is conditional, self-love becomes conditional too. You love yourself only on the days you feel proud. You love yourself only when things are going well. You love yourself only when you look good, feel good, or achieve something. But the moment life becomes messy, when you make a mistake, when your emotions spiral, when your confidence dips, when your plans fall apart, your self-love collapses. Because conditional love can never survive the unpredictability of human life. Buddhism invites you to see worth from a different angle. It teaches that every being has Buddha nature, an innate sacredness, a core of pure potential that remains untouched by the chaos of life. This means your essence is always whole, even when your mind feels broken. Your spirit is always luminous, even when your thoughts are dark. Your heart is always deserving of love, even when your actions fall short of your expectations. You do not need to earn this worth. You only need to remember it. Imagine a child who is learning to walk. They fall again and again, but nobody tells them they are unworthy because they fell. Nobody withdraws love because they stumbled. Nobody says, "You failed, therefore you don't deserve kindness." Instead, everyone understands that falling is part of growing. But when you fall emotionally or mentally, you treat yourself with harshness instead of compassion. You speak to yourself with judgment instead of patience. You forget that learning, stumbling, and struggling are part of the human experience. Self-love becomes possible only when you stop treating yourself like a project that needs to be constantly improved. You must stop believing that your worth depends on perfect behavior, flawless healing, continuous achievements, or constant strength. You are a living being, not a scorecard. You are allowed to have days when you feel lost, tired, sad, insecure, or unmotivated. You are allowed to rest, to pause, to feel overwhelmed. You are allowed to be imperfect. Being human is not a failure, it is the path. Your worth shines brightest in the moments you feel the least worthy. That is the beauty of unconditional self-love. When you give yourself compassion on the days you feel unlovable, your entire relationship with yourself changes. You begin to trust yourself not because you are perfect, but because you finally feel safe in your own heart. The truth is, you have spent most of your life tying your worth to external things, achievements, appearance, validation, relationships, success, discipline, or emotional stability. But none of these are permanent. None of these can sustain your identity. And when something temporary defines your value, your self-love becomes temporary too. You must learn to anchor your worth in something deeper, your humanity. The simple fact that you breathe, that you feel, that you exist. Worthiness is not something you build. It is something you uncover by removing the layers of judgment that were placed on you. When you strip away the expectations, the comparisons, the emotional punishments, the self-criticism, and the belief that you must earn every good thing, what remains is something pure, soft, and unchanging. Your inherent value. Self-love finally feels natural when you stop negotiating with your own soul. When you stop saying, "I will love myself only if," and begin saying, "I will love myself because I am here." The moment you stop making your worth conditional, you create a safe inner home. a home where mistakes are allowed, a home where healing takes as long as it needs, a home where you can fail without losing yourself, a home where you can feel weak without feeling ashamed, a home where you don't have to perform to be accepted. This is the love your heart has been longing for, a love that does not vanish when life gets difficult, a love that does not depend on perfection, a love that holds you even when you fall apart. You will finally love yourself when you stop treating worthiness as a reward and start experiencing it as your natural state. When you stop tying your value to external things, you free yourself. You no longer fear failure because failure does not change your worth. You no longer fear criticism because criticism does not define your identity. You no longer fear being imperfect because imperfection is not a threat to your value. You begin to live with a softness inside you, a quiet confidence that is not based on achievements but on presence. You will only love yourself when you stop earning your worth and start embracing it. The moment you untangle your identity from pressure, performance, and perfection, you return to the truth that you were born with. You are enough not because of what you do, but because of who you are. 11. You will only love yourself when you stop abandoning yourself in difficult moments. One of the deepest wounds, humans carry a wound that destroys self-love quietly and repeatedly, is the habit of abandoning themselves when things get hard. It happens so subtly that most people don't even realize they do it. They are present with themselves when they feel confident, strong, or stable. But the moment fear rises, insecurity appears, loneliness surfaces, or emotions become overwhelming, they distance themselves from their own heart. They judge themselves, criticize their reactions, suppress their feelings, or numb their inner pain. And in that moment of emotional intensity, they leave themselves alone with the very darkness they are afraid of. This abandonment is not always dramatic. Sometimes it sounds like, "Why am I feeling this again?" Or, "I'm so tired of being like this," or "I should be stronger," or "I hate that I always react this way." Other times, it shows up as distraction, scrolling, eating, working, overthinking, forcing positivity, or pretending everything is fine. People try to push their emotions down instead of sitting with them. They push themselves away instead of pulling themselves closer. This internal abandonment becomes a loop that slowly erodes self-love from the inside out. Buddhism teaches that suffering is amplified not by the emotion itself, but by the resistance to the emotion. Pain turns into suffering when you refuse to let your heart feel what it needs to feel. When sadness appears and you call yourself weak, you create suffering. When anxiety rises and you shame yourself for not being calm, you create suffering. When anger surfaces and you judge yourself for being too emotional, you create suffering. Emotions are not the enemy, your rejection of them is. And every time you reject your emotions, you reject yourself. What most people don't understand is that emotions are not problems. They are signals. They arrive with messages, with information, with truths about your inner world. Fear signals uncertainty or lack of safety. Sadness signals loss or unmet needs. Anxiety signals overload or inner conflict. Loneliness signals disconnection, either from others or from yourself. But when you abandon yourself at the first sign of discomfort, you silence these messages. You turn away from the wisdom your heart is trying to share. And as a result, you stay stuck in the same emotional patterns because you never stay long enough to understand them. Self-love requires presence, especially in the moments when your mind is loud and your heart is heavy. It requires the courage to stay with yourself through the discomfort, instead of abandoning yourself to judgment or distraction. Imagine a child who is scared in the dark. If you leave the room, the child becomes more terrified. But if you sit beside them, hold their hand and say, "I'm here with you," the fear softens. Your inner child, the emotional core inside you, works the same way. Abandonment intensifies fear. Presence softens it. Most people learned self-abandonment in childhood. When their feelings were dismissed, criticized, punished, or ignored, they learned to hide their emotions as a survival strategy. They learned that their sadness was too much, their fears were silly, their needs were inconvenient, and their anger was wrong. So now, as adults, whenever these emotions rise, they automatically respond the way they were trained, by shutting down, numbing, distracting, or rejecting themselves. They repeat the same abandonment they experienced long ago. But your healing begins the moment you choose a different response, when sadness rises and instead of rejecting it, you ask, "What are you trying to show me?" When fear appears and you say, "I will not leave you," instead of trying to erase it. When anger comes and you explore what boundary was crossed, instead of shaming yourself for feeling it. When loneliness shows up, and instead of blaming yourself, you offer yourself compassion. This is the shift that transforms your inner world, because love grows wherever you stay present. Self-love is not built through perfect behavior. It's built through consistent presence. You do not learn to love yourself by being the strongest version of yourself. You learn by staying with yourself when you feel the weakest. You do not learn to love yourself by pretending you're fine. You learn by honoring your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. You do not learn to love yourself by having all the answers. You learn by sitting with uncertainty and giving yourself permission to not know. Every moment you choose not to abandon yourself rewires your mind. It sends a message to your nervous system, "I am safe with myself." And safety is the soil in which love grows. People often ask why they feel disconnected from themselves. It's because they only stay present with certain parts of themselves. They love themselves when they are happy, but abandon themselves when they are sad. They love themselves when they are confident, but reject themselves when they feel insecure. They love themselves when they are productive, but criticize themselves when they are tired. They love themselves when they are calm, but judge themselves when they are overwhelmed. But love cannot grow this way. For love to be real, it must include all versions of you, not just the easy ones. Buddhism teaches the importance of compassion, not selective compassion, but compassion for all beings and all experiences, including your own. Compassion means holding your inner world with gentleness. It means offering yourself kindness in moments when your pain makes you feel undeserving. It means putting a warm hand on your heart when your emotions are loud. It means whispering to yourself, "I am here." It means accepting that healing is not about eliminating discomfort, but about learning not to leave yourself during it. Imagine if, for once, you chose to stay. Imagine if you allowed yourself to cry without calling it weakness. Imagine if you listened to your fear without trying to silence it. Imagine if you let your loneliness speak without running away from it. Imagine if you gave your wounds time instead of pushing them to heal faster. Imagine if you comforted your inner child instead of abandoning them like others once did. This is where transformation happens, not through force, but through presence. Self-love becomes inevitable when you become the person you always needed, the person who stays, the person who doesn't run away when emotions rise, the person who doesn't disappear when life gets heavy, the person who doesn't judge the pain but sits beside it, the person who doesn't punish the wound but listens to it, the person who doesn't abandon themselves the way others did. When you become this kind of presence for yourself, your heart opens in ways you never imagined. Staying with yourself during difficult moments is the ultimate act of self-love. It is the moment you prove to yourself that you are not your enemy. It is the moment your heart begins to trust you. It is the moment the inner child feels safe. It is the moment your wounds begin to soften. It is the moment the weight you've carried for years begins to loosen. And it is the moment you begin to see that the love you've been searching for, the deep, unconditional, unwavering love, is born from your own willingness to never abandon yourself again. You will only love yourself when you stop leaving yourself behind, when you stay present in the storm, when you stand beside your heart in its darkest hour, when you choose to remain kind to yourself even when everything inside you feels chaotic, when you choose loyalty to yourself, not just on the good days, but especially on the difficult ones. This is when self-love becomes real. This is when peace begins to grow. This is when healing becomes possible. And this is when you finally return home to yourself. 12. You will only love yourself when you stop believing that your pain makes you unworthy. One of the deepest illusions blocking self-love, an illusion so subtle that most people don't even realize they believe, it is the idea that pain makes you defective, that suffering makes you weak, that emotional wounds make you broken, that having trauma makes you less than, that struggling with your inner world makes you unlovable. This belief sits quietly in the unconscious mind, shaping the way you see yourself, judge yourself, and treat yourself. And until this illusion is removed, self-love will always feel distant, fragile, and incomplete. So many people walk through life carrying the unspoken belief that their emotional pain is evidence that something is wrong with them. When they feel depressed, they think, "Why am I like this?" When they feel anxious, they think, "I should be stronger." When they feel insecure, they think, "I'm not enough." When they feel lost, they think, "Everyone else is doing better than me." And every time they experience an emotion that feels heavy, messy, or unpredictable, they quietly turn against themselves. But Buddhism teaches something revolutionary. Pain is not a flaw, it is a natural part of being human. Pain is not a sign of unworthiness, it is a sign of depth, sensitivity, awareness, and humanity. When people believe that pain makes them unworthy, they hide it, they suppress it, they numb it, they armor themselves. They present a strong front to the world while suffering inside. They wear masks because they fear that if others see their wounds, they will be judged, rejected, or abandoned. But the real tragedy is not that they hide their pain from others, it is that they hide their pain from themselves. They refuse to sit with their sadness, their confusion, their loneliness, their hurt, their unresolved wounds. And this internal rejection becomes the foundation of self-hate. True self-love begins with the courage to acknowledge your pain without believing it makes you unworthy. It begins when you allow yourself to feel without apologizing for it. When you stop punishing yourself for being human, when you stop seeing your suffering as a failure, when you stop believing that other people have it all figured out while you are somehow behind. Pain is not a sign of deficiency, it is a sign of being alive. In Buddhism, pain is understood as part of life's natural fabric. It is one of the fundamental truths. To live is to experience emotional discomfort, not because life is cruel, but because growth requires friction, and the heart expands through experience. Pain is not personal, it is universal. Everyone suffers, everyone struggles, everyone carries unseen wounds. What differs is how people treat themselves when the suffering arises. Some respond with compassion, presence, and acceptance. Others respond with judgment, shame, and self-abandonment. The difference determines whether pain becomes a pathway to self-love or a barrier blocking it. People who reject their pain end up rejecting themselves. They believe, "If I feel this way, something is wrong with me." But the emotion is not the problem, it is the interpretation. Feeling anxious does not make you weak, it means your body feels unsafe. Feeling sad does not make you broken, it means something in your life touched your heart deeply. Feeling insecure does not make you unworthy, it means part of you needs reassurance and healing. Feeling angry does not make you bad, it means a boundary was crossed. Feeling lonely does not make you pathetic. It means you crave connection either with others or with yourself. Pain always points to something meaningful. The moment you stop treating your pain as a stain on your worth, something beautiful shifts inside you. You begin to see your emotions as messengers instead of enemies. You begin to understand that the very pain you avoid carries the wisdom you need. You begin to handle your inner world with softness instead of violence. And this softness becomes the foundation of self-love. You cannot love yourself if you believe certain emotions make you too much or not enough. You cannot love yourself if you shame yourself for feeling deeply. You cannot love yourself if you compare your pain to others and conclude that you are weak. You cannot love yourself if you believe that healing means never hurting again. That is not healing, that is denial. Healing does not remove your feelings. It changes your relationship to them. The truth is, your pain is not a punishment. It is a teacher, a mirror, a guide, a signal that something inside you needs care. Pain arises when there is disconnection, unmet needs, unresolved wounds, or ignored truths. It is the body and mind whispering, "Please, listen." When you reject the pain, you reject the message. When you judge the emotion, you silence the truth. But when you invite the pain closer, with curiosity and compassion, it begins to unravel in front of you. It softens. It reveals its origins. It asks for healing instead of hiding. Imagine a person you love deeply comes to you crying. Would you tell them they are weak? Would you tell them they are failing? Would you tell them they should get over it? Of course not. You would offer comfort, a gentle presence, maybe a warm embrace. You would tell them it's okay to feel. You would listen. So why then do so many people refuse to offer the same compassion to themselves? Self-love demands that you become the person who comforts your own heart, that you hold yourself the way you wish someone held you, that you allow yourself to break without labeling yourself as broken, that you welcome your emotions without treating them as evidence that you are unlovable. The truth is, your pain makes you human, and humanity is not unworthy. It is beautiful. When you accept your pain without shame, you begin the process of emotional integration. Parts of you that were once abandoned suddenly feel seen. Old wounds that were pushed down finally have room to breathe. Your inner child, who was told their feelings were too much, finally feels safe. This safety becomes the foundation upon which real self-love grows. Love cannot grow on top of denial. It cannot grow on top of shame. It cannot grow on top of pretending. Love grows where truth is allowed. When you stop believing that your pain defines you, you reclaim your identity. You recognize that emotions pass. You realize that feelings are temporary visitors. You understand that your core, your essence, remains untouched by the storms of your inner world. You begin to treat yourself with respect during hard times instead of abandonment. And slowly, you realize something profound. Your worth has never changed, not even on your darkest days. When pain comes, instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you begin to ask, "What is this showing me?" This single shift transforms your relationship with yourself. Pain becomes a doorway, not a prison, a guide, not a judgment, a reminder, not a punishment. And when you treat your emotions this way, you create a life where suffering becomes meaningful rather than shameful. Self-love becomes possible only when you stop equating emotional pain with personal failure. You must allow yourself to be fully human, capable of joy and sorrow, confidence and insecurity, clarity and confusion. Only then do you discover the truth that Buddhists have taught for thousands of years. Suffering does not diminish you. Suffering deepens you. It makes you compassionate, wise, grounded, and real. It makes you capable of understanding yourself and others on a profound level. It makes you someone who feels life fully instead of numbing it. You will only love yourself when you stop rejecting the parts of you that hurt. When you stop believing that pain means unworthy. When you embrace your humanity with all its shades, complexities, and contradictions. When you finally say to yourself, "My pain is not evidence against me, it is a part of my story, and I will honor it with love." This is the moment self-love becomes unconditional. This is the moment you return to yourself. This is the moment your heart stops hiding. And this is the moment you realize that the parts of you that hurt the most are the parts that need your love the most. If you look closely at everything you've learned through these lessons, you'll see one truth repeating again and again. You were never unlovable. You were simply disconnected from yourself. Every struggle you faced, every insecurity that haunted you, every moment of doubt that made you collapse inside, none of it meant you were unworthy. It only meant you were human. But because the world taught you to reject your humanity, you began to reject yourself. And that is where your suffering began. From the very beginning, you were taught to treat yourself like something that must be fixed, perfected, disciplined, controlled, upgraded, or transformed before it can be loved. You absorbed beliefs that told you your worth depended on your appearance, achievements, success, emotional stability, or how others saw you. You were trained to chase validation, to fear imperfection, to compare your life to others, and to abandon yourself whenever life became heavy. Without realizing it, you learned to live life as if your value needed permission to exist. But through these lessons, Buddhism reminds you of a sacred truth. Love cannot be forced, and worth cannot be earned. Love grows when you stop fighting yourself. Love returns when you stop chasing perfection. Love appears when you stop looking outward for approval and begin returning inward for connection. Love strengthens when you stop comparing your journey to others. Love deepens when you stop controlling your inner world. Love expands when you stop treating your worth like a reward. And love becomes unshakable when you stop abandoning yourself in moments of pain. The journey back to self-love is not a journey of becoming someone new. It is a journey of remembering who you were before the world taught you to doubt yourself. It is not a journey of perfection. It is a journey of presence. It is not about forcing positivity. It is about allowing honesty. It is not about controlling the mind. It is about understanding it. It is not about eliminating pain. It is about embracing your emotions as a natural part of life's unfolding. It is not about earning worth. It is about returning to the worth you were born with. For so long, you believed your flaws made you unlovable, but your flaws are part of your humanity. You believed your struggles made you inadequate, but your struggles made you wise. You believed your pain made you broken, but your pain made you deep. You believed your insecurities made you weak, but your insecurities made you real. Everything you were taught to be ashamed of your emotions, your wounds, your fears, are the very things that make you human and therefore worthy of compassion. Self-love is not a destination you reach after healing perfectly. It is not a prize you win after becoming strong enough or amazing enough. Self-love is something you practice moment by moment, especially in the moments when you feel the least deserving. It is built in the smallest decisions, the decision to sit with your discomfort instead of rejecting it, the decision to breathe through your fear instead of running from it, the decision to be gentle with yourself when your mind is loud, the decision to stay present when your heart hurts, the decision to forgive yourself for being human. You have spent years trying to earn love from the world, from others, and even from yourself. You've tried to perfect your life because you thought perfection would finally bring you peace. You've tried to silence your emotions because you thought emotions made you weak. You've tried to control your mind because you thought your thoughts defined you. You've tried to fix your flaws because you thought they made you unworthy. You've tried to hide your pain because you thought pain made you shameful. But now, you can finally see the truth. The very act of trying so hard is what blocked love in the first place. You do not need to force self-love. You need to stop fighting yourself long enough to feel the love that already exists. You do not need to create worth. You need to remove the beliefs that hide your worth. You do not need to transform into the best version of yourself to deserve kindness. You need to give kindness to the version of yourself who feels lost, scared, and exhausted. You do not need to heal perfectly. You need to allow yourself to heal naturally. You do not need to silence your emotions. You need to listen to them with patience. You do not need to win the war in your mind. You need to stop waging war against yourself. There is a softer way to live, a gentler way to exist, one where you no longer fight every part of your inner world, where you no longer reject yourself for being imperfect, where you no longer demand constant strength from a heart that is still learning how to breathe. This softer life begins when you finally allow yourself to be human, without shame and without conditions. Imagine treating yourself the way a loving parent treats a scared child, with warmth, patience, tenderness, and protection. Imagine meeting your emotions with understanding instead of judgment. Imagine seeing your fears as parts of you that need comfort, not punishment. Imagine sitting with your sadness without labeling it as weakness. Imagine talking to yourself like someone you care about deeply. This is where self-love grows, in the moments you stop abandoning yourself and start standing beside yourself. The truth is, you do not need to try to love yourself. You need to stop unloving yourself. You need to stop rejecting, criticizing, and abandoning your own heart. You need to stop believing the lies your insecurities whisper. You need to stop measuring your worth through the eyes of others. You need to stop believing that your darkness makes you less deserving. You need to stop expecting perfection before allowing compassion. You need to stop treating your pain like a flaw in your humanity. You are allowed to be emotional. You are allowed to be imperfect. You are allowed to struggle. You are allowed to heal slowly. You are allowed to not have it all figured out. You are allowed to feel lost. You are allowed to need time. You are allowed to be human. And none of this makes you unworthy. It makes you real. And real people are the ones who deserve the deepest love. The moment you stop forcing self-love is the moment you create space for it to rise naturally. The moment you stop holding your breath is the moment your heart begins to soften. The moment you stop controlling every emotion is the moment inner peace begins to grow. The moment you stop chasing perfection is the moment your soul begins to rest. The moment you stop abandoning yourself is the moment you finally become whole. And in that wholeness, something miraculous happens. You finally meet the version of yourself you've been searching for your entire life, the real you. The you who has always been worthy. The you who has always been enough. The you who has always deserved love. The you who was never broken, only hidden beneath years of judgment and fear. Self-love was never missing. It was simply waiting for you to stop running long enough to feel it. This is your return home, not to a perfect self, but to a true self. Not to a flawless life, but to an honest life. Not to a forced love, but to a natural love. The kind of love that doesn't disappear. The kind of love that holds you through storms. The kind of love that wraps around your soul and whispers, "You are enough. You always were. You always will be." This is your beginning. The beginning of a life lived gently, compassionately, and with deep, unshakable love for yourself, not because you earned it, but because you finally remembered that you never had to.